Military families have incredible stories of perseverance while navigating frequent moves, deployments, food insecurity, transitioning out of the military, and more. This is the place for them to share those stories, highlighting unique experiences of military families. Welcome to the Professional Dependent Podcast. This is going to be fun. So, what all do you have? You've got a lot going on right now. Like, you're getting ready to leave to go to. Are you going to DC?
Yep, I leave on Saturday. So I'll be out there for several days for the Airspace and Cyber Conference with the Air and Space Forces Association. So this time last year, they were celebrating the anniversary. I think it was the anniversary of the Air Force they were celebrating.
Okay.
And so they had a huge conference last year. It was like bigger than they'd ever had before. And they decided that they wanted to pull in quality of life panelists. So I wanted to talk about not just about space operations or air missions or other things that were more technically oriented. They actually wanted to talk about what is it going to take to continue to recruit great people for the Air and Space Forces and then retain them. And of course, you and I both know that quality of life for families sometimes suffers.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to talk about those things. And here we are a year later. And what started out as, hey, let's have a few panels for quality of life has turned into, let's have a task force for quality of life.
Nice.
So there are about 13 of us, or I think there are about 15 altogether. About 13 of us will be there next week. That we meet and we help support AFA on their programming and kind of what they can do from their perspective to help improve quality of life for air and space families.
Love it.
So that's what I'm going for, and it's going to be fun.
That is awesome. So I have a bad habit about doing this where I just start diving into things. As we just said, you and I have known each other for almost forever. All the way marched on drumline together. The only person I've had on here that I marched on the drumline with. So, of course, this is going to be the best episode ever because we're both drummers. But why don't you introduce yourself and tell the audience who you are? Yeah.
All right. So I'm Melissa Shaw, and I've known you since undergrad. We did drumline together. So I was a music major and really serious about music for a lot of years. But at some point grew up and moved away from music and eventually met and married my husband, who was an officer in the Army. And so I've spent the last 11 years and some change as a military spouse. My own career has been in communications and marketing for the whole, ever since I kind of left college and grad school and started my first real jobs. It's always been marketing and communications for me. And meeting and marrying my husband was a huge, huge lifestyle change for me because I was doing my own thing and I had moved and stuff like that before, but it was by my own choice. I'd never had anybody tell me I had to move. I had to relocate. And so 11 and a half years into being married, he's now on his second branch of the military. So he started out Army, and he was one of the first officers to commission over into the United States Space Force. So now we're a Guardian family. So I finally learned all the Army stuff. And then he said, surprise.
Guess what?
Now you get to learn the Space Force stuff. And I'm like, cool. Where is the manual? And he's like, well, actually one doesn't exist yet because we're brand new. So we're gonna have to learn as we go. So I've spent the last 3 years or so learning, how to be a guardian spouse and an advocate for guardian families. My career has always been important to me. And so through all of our moves, and we've had a lot of them, like I said, 11 and a half or so years of marriage, and we are on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're on our 5th duty station.
Okay.
We had 3 kids. The kids are 2 years apart, and they were all born in different places. 2 of them overseas. And so we've had our fair share of PCSing. When we first got married, he deployed 24 days later to Afghanistan for a combat deployment, and that was his 3rd deployment. So we've kind of been through it. We've seen the Army side of stuff. Now we're seeing the Space Force side. We've PCS without kids. We've PCS with kids. We've done a CONUS. We've done CONUS. We've kind of done it all. And through all that, it's been tough to keep a career going. So one of the things that I found myself really passionate about in the military spouse space is advocating for military spouses as employees. I think right now, the statistics that some of the organizations like Blue Star Families have put out say that essentially the numbers they're coming out with indicate that the military spouse community is the most under and unemployed community in the United States. And so when we're talking about quality of life for families, if a spouse can't get a job that they're qualified for, so they're working below their qualifications and making less than they could, or if they can't find work at all, it impacts the service member's decision to stay in or get out.
Right.
And so if we want to retain service members, we want to have them be able to focus on the mission. It helps a lot if they're not worried about finances, if they're not worried about their spouse being happy, and if the spouses can, in fact, go out and contribute financially to the family if that's what they want to do. And so that's kind of the area of the military that I have found myself very naturally becoming an advocate in. So it's a space I'm really involved in my last organization professionally. I kind of had the good fortune to come into business with a couple of friends in Missouri. And they invited me to become a partner in a company that they were just starting up, a social media startup. And this was back in like 2016. And by 2017, I had become a partner in the company. By 2020, we had expanded the company to cover, we worked with electric utilities, electric cooperatives, and broadband utilities. And we were working with more than 130 of them in 21 states across the country.
Wow.
And so in 2020, we were acquired by a more mature organization called Pioneer Utility Resources out of Hillsboro, Oregon. And I stayed with that organization for 3 more years. And during that time, I built a military spouse employment program. Everything we did, we could do remotely. All we needed was cloud-based software and employees that we could trust. And in my experience, if you hire the right military spouse, you can trust them. They're going to get the work done.
Right.
And so we did, and we were successful. And more than 20% of the communication staff at Pioneer, when I left in March, were military spouses. So I know it can be done, right? I've seen it, I've done it. And so that's kind of part of my purpose. That's what I'm here, as a military spouse. That's part of what I'm trying to help influence change around for other military spouses after me.
That is awesome. like seriously, I don't think either one of us, if you had told us, way back in the day that, hey, Mike, you're going to run a podcast talking to military spouses about the awesome stuff they're doing, and Melissa's going to be one of your guests, and she's going to be an advocate for spouse employment, we both would have looked at each other and been like, nah.
I think that the first thing we would have said was, "What the heck is a podcast?"
Right?
Because we're old enough that they didn't exist at that time.
This is true. They're totally what is podcast? No, does that come on a CD or what?
That's right. Oh my gosh, I had quite the CD collection in college.
I actually found I've got a box that's got all my CDs in it that I've managed to keep, and I keep this one close by. I don't know if you can see that one.
Voodoo Grove. Oh my gosh. That's a classic.
Even better, not only do I have the Voodoo Grove CD, but Doug signed it.
That is amazing. What he's at some point, maybe not on the podcast. I need to find out what he's up to.
I think he's still playing music because I think he's in Texas.
Okay.
But he was a camp counselor for a band camp I went to at Northwestern, and I think I bought that CD for like $5, and he signed it. It was anyway, great times. So you started in marketing and communications, right? And then you managed to build yourself up to having this remote job. How did that start off for you, from being like, no, everything's typically in an office setting, I'm gonna work in an office, to be like, no, I really need to kind of be more flexible on where I'm doing my work from? How did that start off for you?
For me, it started off when we PCS to CONUS.
Okay.
So we were stationed in Colorado Springs, and I was working then for a communications agency that focused on brand development. So I was doing a lot of branding work, like brand strategy and creating updated brands or new brands for companies. And so we were here, and as soon as he got back from Afghanistan, I mean, I had been in Colorado for less than 2 years, moved out here to be with him, took the job. He deployed to Afghanistan. He got back from Afghanistan, and within the first 2 weeks or so that he was back, we already had been told we were going to Germany a few months later. And so it was a real quick turnaround. I didn't have a whole lot of time, in the company here. It was a good company. I'm still in touch with a lot of people I worked with, but it was traditional. I worked in the office every day. When we got ready to go at CONUS and I had to give up that job, I wasn't ready to give up my career. I
Right.
mean, that's like the first piece is like, I wasn't ready to give that up.
Hmm.
And so I knew I couldn't take that job with me overseas, but what I could do is take a lot of what I had done for them and maybe do it on a smaller scale as a freelancer.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't have a whole team, there. I was one of many strategists and I
Hmm.
had a whole graphic design team that I worked with. And working for myself was a little bit different than that, but I was able to kind of scale things into I looked closely what my strengths were in
Hmm.
that arena. And before we got on the plane to go to Germany, I already had a website built. I already was kind of putting word out. I had worked with a different military spouse who now she's doing great. She's a graphic designer and she had helped me establish my branding for my
Okay.
business and for at the time I had a blog. And she helped me establish the branding for both. And now she's working for LinkedIn, teaching Adobe classes, and
Oh,
she's like
nice.
doing amazing things, right? And the mother of a special needs child, and she's still a military spouse. So
Hmm.
she's one who's kind of done a great job at making it all work. She helped me establish my branding, and I built my own website. And I had all that done before we even got on the plane. So I got on Twitter and I started kind of tweeting out saying, hey, I'm available. If anybody needs like
Hmm.
content creation, if you need marketing or brand strategy, if you need basic graphic design work, I can help you. I'm going to be
Hmm.
working for myself moving forward. And almost immediately, someone I knew from Missouri, my home state, that I had worked with before I met my husband when I was living back in that area and doing
Hmm.
my own thing that had nothing to do with being a military spouse. He and I had become really acquainted through some networking and stuff that we had done. And he said, well, I have a project I need a writer on. Would you be interested in writing about education? And what
Hmm.
was my degree in college? Like I was studying for music education, right?
Right.
And so that was a really good fit. And that was the first project that I did that was fully remotely. And he was great because he said he didn't care when I was working. It didn't
Hmm.
matter to him that I was in a different time zone. All that mattered to him, and I think what I focused on with him and other clients was what matters to you? Like what deadline matters to you?
Right.
Because I'll meet your deadline as long as you know I can't necessarily be on call at all times of your workday because I got to
Right.
sleep a little bit, right?
Hmm.
And so we established what those critical responsibilities were on my end, what those critical deadlines were, and we made it work. And he was one of the people who then later invited me to come into business with he and his business partner on the
Oh.
startup that we grew and
Hmm.
successfully sold. I think that I was at a Hiring Our Heroes event here in Colorado last week. And one of the things that people really talked about was that when you when those opportunities come, like for me to start working remotely,
Hmm.
I might have had my own website, my own branding and all that, and it might have just sat like a lame duck
Right.
for the whole time we were overseas, except that I had a network. I had built my network. And so when I put myself out there, somebody from my network, in this case, the man who later became my business partner, said, I know you. I know you're reliable. I know
Hmm.
your skill set. And yes, I'll take a chance on you. I'll hire you. And he did. And every career opportunity I've had since then has come by building that network.
Right.
And when you've got the network and you've got the trust, and I think people are more likely to let you work remotely. And
Hmm.
then furthermore, once you've done the first thing remotely, then
Hmm.
you've got a track record and you can
Right.
tell others, you can build on that. Like now I've been doing remote work and I built an organization to function remotely in their operations starting back in 2016, 2017.
Hmm.
Right. I've been working remotely for my own business since 2013. And then starting with the startup in around 2016, 2017. And so I've built on all of that. So now when I interview or I talk to somebody about what my skills are,
Hmm.
I know the pros and the cons of working remotely and I know them intimately.
Right.
And so I'm able to have that conversation. And that combined with like building my network and having those conversations with people and having that
Hmm.
trust already established before I'm talking about working for them, those things have been critical, I think.
So something you said a couple times just then that I don't know if a lot of spouses think about. You mentioned building your network.
Yeah.
How would you suggest? What does that look like? How would you suggest a spouse that's trying to start navigating working or getting back into the workforce? Because I know that's one thing a lot of spouses do is like, okay, well, I know I can't work for a certain amount of time, but now I'm ready to get back into the workforce. How would you suggest somebody start building that network? Is that a LinkedIn thing? Is it a personal thing? Like, what does that look like for somebody to do that?
It's a great question. I think it can look a few different ways. I think the LinkedIn presence is important,
Mhm.
especially, I mean, depending on your industry, especially, but if you're in my industry with marketing and communications, if you don't have social media presence, people think you're irrelevant largely.
Mhm.
And so I think the online presence is important, but I also think that two other things come to mind. One, and I kind of hate this because I think that the military relies too heavily on volunteer force. Like they
Hmm.
rely way too heavily on spouses giving their time up for free. But if you volunteer strategically, it helps you build your network.
Okay.
And I can tell you that I am moving into another professional role here, hopefully as early as Monday. And that role, in part, opened up to me because I was an active volunteer on our base in Hohenfels, Germany, 10 years ago.
Hmm.
But I was actively involved in the community, and I networked with the senior spouses there. At the
Hmm.
time, my husband was he was a company commander, so he had been a captain back then. And I had people in my network whose spouses were majors or lieutenant colonels or
Hmm.
even colonels doing like battalion commands. And I wasn't shy to ask them questions or to ask them for thoughts or advice on how to navigate the things that we were navigating. And
Hmm.
as a result, I built relationships with them. And one of them is part of the reason I got my foot in the door with the hiring manager that I'm going to be working for in my next role. And it took a decade for that network to mean anything professionally. And I
Right.
didn't start out with it in with a transactional mindset. I didn't
Hmm.
build that relationship with that particular senior spouse 10 years ago thinking someday I'm going to get something from this.
Right.
Just connected, and actually she did her master's at NSU.
Oh, nice.
How fun is that connection? They were stationed at Fort Polk, I think.
Okay.
And so she did her master's in English through NSU when
That's
she
awesome.
was down there in Louisiana. And so that was one of the things we bonded over was we
Hmm.
shared, not only did we share an alma mater, we
Hmm.
shared like a very small school alma mater in the South, right?
Right.
Someplace that you go around the country and not a lot of people know where Northwestern State University of
Hmm.
Louisiana is. And you meet somebody who does, and it's like, oh my gosh, small world, right? So that's part of what we connected over. So I do think that, I made that connection through volunteering, but I
Okay.
was strategic in my volunteering. I volunteered for things like managing the website for the
Hmm.
spouses club, managing the website for the swim team,
Hmm.
Aconis at our community. I also raised my hand when they needed someone to manage a major fundraising event, like a
Hmm.
once a year multi-day, bringing 80 plus vendors in from countries
Hmm.
all over Europe to like sell their handmade goods and cheeses and wines and all of that at a bazaar, an international
Right.
bazaar. And I always had in mind that if I could either show people what I had done, like
Hmm.
here's the website I've managed, and it's you can navigate it well, and it's got all the things you're looking for in website management back in those days. Or I could say I managed this program and I had X number of vendors I communicated
Right.
with, and I helped set up volunteer shifts for this many dozens of volunteers over this many days, and it all culminated with a 3-day event that
Hmm.
raised X tens of thousands of dollars to support scholarships for military kids or military spouses in that community. It was
Hmm.
quantitative, right?
Right.
I could show someone physically what I had done, or I could quantify it. And I think that that type of strategic investment in volunteer time can really pay off.
Hmm.
And it helps you if that's your skill set and you can show that in a volunteer capacity. That's a great way to build your network because other people will be grateful that you bring that skill set.
Hmm.
If you bring it authentically and you're willing to share it and it makes sense for you and your family for you to invest some of your time that way, then the people that you're working with will see that. They'll see kind of authentically who you are.
Hmm.
And that becomes the beginning of then working with those people to build those networks. I can tell you that you're not going to build your network if you don't get out of your house.
Right.
And I know that's hard for people, especially after COVID. A lot of us want everything to be remotely, but I can tell
Hmm.
you no matter how many online webinars you take or whatever, there's nothing that really replaces physically working together with someone on something.
Right.
Sitting down and having coffee and talking about what the website needs to have in it, or going to spouses clubs meetings and planning a major event together, or
Hmm.
doing whatever the thing is that feels right for you to give back to your community. Nothing replaces that. I just have so many memories of working together with certain people over the years. And those are the things that really build the relationship. I think the same goes for you and I, right? We
Hmm.
worked together on a drum line for
Yep.
several years in college, and we learned multiple shows every season, and we had to
Hmm.
do sectionals, and we had to do all this stuff together. And so we have a sense of pride in what we did together
Right.
that stayed with us all these years later. So I think, if you can get out and you can volunteer strategically, that's a great starting
Hmm.
point. you can't undervalue the importance of having a social media presence, but that might not be where you build your network. That might just
Mhm.
be where you stay in touch with your network over time. And
Gotcha.
then I think finally, there are a lot of upskill programs out there now. So if you mentioned like, if you've been out of the job market for a while and you're getting ready to get back in, things like joining a cohort at Hiring Our Heroes
Mhm.
or the University of Syracuse's IVMF program. There are programs out there that help you to get certifications or help you upskill in some way to prepare to rejoin the job community, the
Mhm.
career community. And I think that many of those, their programs are cohorts in fashion. So you might not necessarily get to meet people in person,
Right.
but you might be in the same training sessions with the same people for an extended period of time. And through that, you may build a network with people who are preparing to re-enter the same industry you're re-entering. And so I think that would be really good too.
Now, you said something about volunteering that I don't think I'd ever even considered for myself, was that you were very selective in how and where you volunteered because you wanted your volunteer work to showcase your skill set. And
Mhm.
that's something I really think they need to change their wording on whenever they are trying to get military spouses to volunteer. It's not just, hey, come out and volunteer, it's going to help your resume. It's, hey, here's how you can word this volunteer thing, or how you can do these volunteer things to work within your skill set. Because whenever somebody like me, they're always being told, hey, well, go volunteer. Well, whenever I hear volunteer, I'm thinking, go volunteer at the thrift shop. How is that going to help me later? But the idea of volunteering for something that you have a certain skill set in,
Yeah.
that actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. With your background, with emergency management and planning kind of stuff, being able to raise your hand and say, hey, does my on base police or fire department need volunteer support?
Hmm.
Even if it's something that doesn't seem super relevant right out of the gate, at least it's in the same sphere, the same
Right.
world, right?
Hmm.
And then I can put on my resume that I did work with this emergency response organization
Right.
in some capacity. Excuse me. And I think too that, something like thrift store volunteering, there are a lot of ways that as a hiring manager, I look at transferable skill sets when I look at a
Right.
military spouse resume. As a military spouse, you can think about transferable skill sets when you're selecting your volunteer opportunities,
Hmm.
right? So if you're a website designer and there's no opportunity for you to do website design in a volunteer capacity, you can't help that, right?
Right.
But what you might be able to do is if you come from, I don't know, using the thrift store example, like if you come from a retail background,
Hmm.
volunteering in thrift store makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then if you can contribute in such a way that you've improved the layout of the store
Hmm.
and maybe sales have improved as a result, or maybe you've developed a new system for tagging the merchandise or deciding when to mark things down,
Hmm.
right? And how you indicate what's been marked down and then how you market that to the community on base. All of those things are skill sets that would be translatable or transferable into retail.
Hmm.
They'd also be things that you could convert, excuse me, over from a customer service perspective.
Hmm.
Excuse me, my allergies have been going nuts the last 2 weeks out here. One of the things that I've seen, and this might surprise people, but I mean, part of my job when I was hiring in my last organization, and I managed, my team was about 20 people, and it was over multiple teams. I had multiple program areas I was
Hmm.
responsible for. Two of them required people that were working for me to interact with our clients or even with the people who are getting their electricity from our clients,
Hmm.
right? So we were doing social media. And imagine if there's a major outage, like a power outage,
Right.
how worse, imagine there's a broadband and power outage on Super Bowl Sunday. We've dealt with things like that.
Right.
Imagine what people are going to do when they get on their phone, because that's the only access they've got, and they're
Hmm.
trying to talk to their utility provider to find out when power is going to be back on. Imagine
Hmm.
the attitude they're going to have when that Super Bowl Sunday, now their crock pot's not cooking their,
Right.
whatever they're making, and they can't watch the game because their broadband is out and the
Hmm.
power is out. So their house is getting freezing cold because their heater's not running
Right.
and they can't watch the game and nothing's cooking, right?
Right.
You're not happy. I once interviewed somebody who had worked as a 911 operator.
Hmm.
Do you think there's any connection between being a 911 operator and working in marketing and communications for utilities? On the surface, no.
No, but going through the thing you just laid out, yeah, 100%.
100%. You can keep your cool.
Hmm.
You're going to be able to know how to follow a script for communication with the person that you're talking
Hmm.
to, but also know when you might need to call in a manager or a superior to be able to go off script or get extra support.
Right.
You're gonna stay cool. I mean, if you can handle being a 911 operator, you can handle some people yelling at you because their power and broadband are
Hmm.
out on Super Bowl Sunday.
Right.
Right? That's one example of two seemingly really different industries. But in that interview, we actually couldn't get that person. They found a different job they took
Hmm.
instead. But I would have been happy to hire that military spouse
Hmm.
because I saw so many skills from the 911 operator role she had previously worked in
Hmm.
to what we were doing. And I think as a military spouse, when you're looking at what you're going to volunteer for, think about how those skills will translate into what you're going to do next in your career.
Hmm.
And then you have to think about how you're going to help connect those dots for the hiring manager when you get that
Right.
interview or when you're putting your resume together. You can't just say, I was a 911 operator, I did 911 stuff.
Right.
You focus on, I can stay cool under pressure. I know how to follow guidance.
Hmm.
I know when and how to pull in a manager for support or a supervisor for support. I have excellent communication skills and
Hmm.
customer service skills. And you can translate all those things over into a job that deals in customer service, a job that deals in critical communications of any kind,
Hmm.
et cetera. So when you're taking on those volunteer efforts, I think thinking what skills, even if the role doesn't translate directly, what skills am I gaining
Hmm.
that I could communicate to a hiring manager or a hiring authority will translate. And
Right.
I think that's really, really important. I've interviewed a lot of military spouses over the years. And the ones that did the best job presenting themselves they had that skill. They knew how
Hmm.
to communicate what they had done and how that translated into what they wanted to do for us.
Yeah, having spent 8 years in law enforcement, a good dispatcher is worth their weight in gold. So if you ever hire somebody that's a dispatcher and they are doing anything talking to people, it doesn't matter what the other person's saying to them. They're not going to get rattled. They'll be fine.
And they'll know how to filter the information and know what to pass forward too,
Exactly.
right? Like, because they've got to be able to be that filter to say, here's the key information that
Hmm.
the emergency responders need to receive, and
Yep.
here's all the other stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
going to catch the other stuff and hold on to it, but I'm not going to pass it forward
Right.
and muck up radio communication or confuse the call to the
Hmm.
emergency responders. It's an important. I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot of
There
skill
is.
there.
And another thing you said a minute ago that I honestly think a lot of spouses miss this just entirely is you said when you're building your network, you don't want to build it as to where it feels transactional.
For sure.
Because like if I approach somebody and they can tell that I'm only going to get to know them because they are, you know, somebody that's important doing something over here, and that's the
Mhm.
only reason why I want to meet them, then that person's going to sniff me out in a heartbeat. They're
Mhm.
going to be like, oh, they just want something from me, as opposed to if you're going to it authentically, you're like, hey, I understand your. I'll just use drummers for example. Hey, I heard you play drums. Cool. I played, marched for 2 years in college and all through high school. Would you play? Did you ever do DCI? Going through all this stuff. Now that's not a transaction. That's a shared experience, and now we can kind of build that network from there going forward because now they know, oh, we have a shared experience. This is something that's a little bit more organic and not just, oh, I'm the president of a company. This person wants to come work for my company. That's why they're meeting me. You know,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I would also say that sometimes you're going to meet somebody and it is transactional.
yeah,
If that's the case, own it and be ready to make the ask. So,
right.
case in point, my husband is a West Point grad. And I kept finding myself in the same LinkedIn threads with this gentleman
Hmm.
who worked for an organ. I won't name the organization, but it's a household name. It's a household, organization that works in healthcare.
Okay.
And he and I kept landing we weren't connected on LinkedIn, but I kept
Hmm.
seeing him and I both responding to the same like military spouse employment related stuff on
Hmm.
LinkedIn. And it was borderline getting awkward for me because I'm like, we just keep ending up in the same conversations. But I
Right.
don't know him. So I dropped him a private message on LinkedIn. And I was like, among other things, I said, go Army, beat Navy,
Right.
because I saw that he was a West Point alum. And introduced myself, and he responded to me very quickly. He's a senior leader in that national household brand company. He got back to me almost right away, like maybe an hour later. And part of what he said was, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, here's what you can do for me. Like, in addition to just, I'd like to stay connected because I think
Right.
you're doing great work in the space. I am looking at transitioning out of my current career. Here's what I've been doing. You know, I've helped build a startup, sold the startup, stayed with the new company for 3 full years for continuity and to take care of my people. And I'm ready for a change. And I would like, one of the things I'm considering is whether I could get into a private sector organization helping do HR, maybe like maybe transition from marketing and communications into HR. And I'm interested to talk to somebody who's doing that. Could we do an informational interview?" And he said, "Absolutely." And it wasn't a week later, he set out a full hour of his time. And again, he's a senior leader in a national company. His
Right.
schedule is packed, I'm sure. But he made that time for me. We sat down and talked for, he blocked out an hour. And after, like, as we were approaching the end of the hour, he said, "I am enjoying our conversation. I do not have to go to my meeting at the top of the hour. I would rather stay and continue talking to you. Is that okay with you?" I said, "Yes, sir, absolutely." We ended up talking for, however long, a little over an hour, had a great conversation. And in it, he said, Are you familiar with the military spouse or military family advisory network, MFAN?" And I said, "I am. I'm not like intimately familiar with what they do, but I am familiar with them. I follow them on LinkedIn. I see that they do a lot of good work with advocacy for military families." And he said, "Yep." And he said, "I think that you should keep your eyes open because in the next couple of months, they're going to be looking for their next cohort of advisory board members." And I said, "Okay, great. Like, I'll keep my eyes open for that."
Right.
He then dropped an email introducing me to the president of that organ, or this, I think the title is probably executive director because it's a nonprofit, but the woman
Right.
who leads MFAN. And so he dropped an email introducing the two of us and shared with her that he had suggested that I pay attention for the cohort announcements to come open. And I did. I applied, I interviewed, and I was selected as one of, I think it's 14 of us. It's a very small group, and they had hundreds of applicants to be able to advise MFAN over the next 2 years on what their priorities should be and to help them. They do a lot of really great surveying work where they survey military families and they use that data to inform what they advocate for. But we also have the ability to build that network with one another
Right.
about an issue or issues that we all care about moving forward for the next two years. And it's a pretty elite opportunity. It all started because I wasn't shy to cold call someone on
Right.
LinkedIn and finds kind of warm it up with a connection that we had, the Army Navy connection. Our kids, we've got them trained. If you say go Army, they respond beat Navy. And so, it was a very natural, it's like a family
Right.
culture thing for us for me to drop that in. But then from there, when he said, what can I do for you? I was prepared and I told him, and that opened up doors for me. It made me aware of programs I would not have otherwise have been tracking. And I was prepared then when the opportunity came, I was ready to apply for that program, put my name in the hat and see how it went. And I was able to get in. So I think that my point is that, yes, you don't want all networking to be transactional. You want most of your networking to be really authentic. It is also okay sometimes to say, okay, military spouse or military employment advocate or whatever, who's in this really important role or who's very senior in my spouse's organization, and maybe you could help me figure things out. I'm Melissa. Here's what I need. I admire you and what you've done. Would you be willing to help me with X, Y, and Z?
So
Right.
but something that you said there, you didn't go with a generic question. Hey, can I take 20 minutes of your time and discuss military spouse employment? You had a laser focus. I need this.
Yes.
It wasn't just wide open. You're like, I know you're really good at this thing. Here's what I need help with. And it was a precise ask. It wasn't just a generic ask. And that's something that people get confused, and they do have that interaction that they know is going to be transactional. Like, if I could just take 10 minutes of your time, like you just said, that individual is a senior leader in a national, that their time is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour.
It is. Yeah.
So whenever you're talking about, can I just take 20 minutes of your time, you're costing that company that much money. So by having a finite, hey, this is what I need, that person can say that is worth my time, not
Yep,
just a
and
generic
then
question.
respect the time. If you say it's gonna take 10 minutes, make sure it's only gonna take 10 minutes.
Right.
Don't bluff and say 10 minutes to try to get your foot in the door, but what you actually need is a 30 or 45-minute or an hour-long conversation.
Right.
I've had the really cool opportunity over the last year or so to have a lot of engagement with some very senior spouses in the Air and Space Forces.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen, and these are spouses who have been in for a very long time and are very well connected. They have so much personal insight and also can help advance causes they believe in because they've been doing this for so long and they know the right people, right, to
Right.
speak out to. With them, I've been amazed at how humble and open they are to speaking with younger spouses.
Mm-hmm.
And they want those relationships too. Like they want to have that authentic connection because I mean, can you imagine? It's lonely enough. You and I have both been doing the military spouse thing for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and our spouses are a little bit further along in their careers. You guys are probably like us. We're starting to see our friends retire.
Yeah.
Right. And so our
Yep.
network within the military community is getting smaller.
Mm-hmm.
We're already on, if you think about like a business life cycle, right?
Oh
We're
yeah.
already over the hump on the life
Yep.
cycle. And I know that it's only a matter of time before more of my close friend military spouses have their families retire and they get out of this lifestyle and they're able to set roots down someplace and they don't need our friendship in the same way.
Right.
These really senior spouses, I'm sure, are experiencing some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're down to a point where there's only a few of them who have been in for 30 years or
Right.
28 years or whatever. They enjoy that authentic connection with younger spouses from what I've seen. But again, being able to approach them with the same kind of laser focus. The ones that I have the opportunity to work with, they know that I'm coming to them through a task force that I'm on or a committee
Right.
I'm working with, or I'm coming to them because we share a passion for helping companies see the value of hiring military spouses. And then that's what we kind of focus in on. That's what we build our relationship on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that laser focus doesn't just apply to business leaders, it also applies to trying to build those relationships with senior spouses in your organization.
Mm-hmm.
I can't emphasize enough how helpful it is to be willing as a lieutenant's wife or and we're officer, so I don't want to try to pretend like I know what it's like to be an enlisted family. I'm sure it's a little bit different for those families. But for us, when he was a lieutenant, when he was a captain and so on, me being able to go to a battalion commander's wife and say, you've been doing this a while, you've kind of got this figured out. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about my career? Or do you mind if I ask you a few questions about how you've made it work living overseas? Because I'm feeling kind of lonely right now. Like I feel like I don't have my network yet. I have never been turned away. I have never once had a spouse say, no, I won't make time for you.
Right.
Not once in the 11 plus years I've been doing this. But again, the more senior the spouse, the more I think they do appreciate you coming to them and respecting their time and being specific because they might not be able to help you. Right. If you ask them for help on like your job search and they have been they've happily played the role of spouse and homemaker and child rearer, and career is not really something they value as much, then they're the wrong spouse for you to talk to. But they might say, you know what, I'm not the right person, but let me introduce you to my friend.
Yeah, that's anytime I'm involved anywhere, like whenever we were in Alaska, my boss, whenever Kelly was PCSing out and we were getting ready to leave, my boss was like, I really hate that you're leaving. I was like, that's not true. You don't hate that I'm leaving. You don't like my Rolodex leaving. Because I may not have known the answer, but I knew who did know the answer.
Isn't that a big part of like being a successful, especially when your spouse is in a leadership role and you're playing the role of like key spouse or key spouse mentor? They drill it into us that our job isn't to solve people's problems, it's to direct them to resources.
Yeah.
So you become that person, you learn the resources, and once you learn them, you don't forget them. And you also meet the people. And then once you meet the people, you build the relationships, you have the network. So you do become somebody who, I'm to the point now where I'm like, look, if you need anything, come talk to me.
Right.
Because I might not be the person to help you, but there's a really good chance I'll know who to send you to who can help. And I'm having that conversation a lot now because I'm so familiar with the helping agencies, the services available through the military or through nonprofits that serve the military, both locally and nationally. And then like you, I have that Rolodex of friends
Yeah.
And so if somebody comes to me and they say, "Hey, I really want to work for this organization,"
Mhm.
or I really, my family is struggling with cost of living in the duty station that we're
Mhm.
in, or my child needs therapy and I can't
Right.
find a therapist for them or whatever, I know influx are a resource for
Right.
therapy, right? I know that there are helping agencies out there that can help support families temporarily through
Mhm.
financial hardships. And I can help you figure out which ones of those might serve your needs, or at least send you to those organizations to ask questions and do your own research.
Right.
So it's a kind of a, I don't know, it's one of those things. They talk a lot about the silent work of women in
Mhm.
relationships, like that women typically are the ones remembering the birthday presents and the
Right.
like doing all the little things. I think that the seasoned military spouse has a similar silent load that we
Mhm.
carry that results in us knowing the resources, knowing the people, and what good does it do to know all that if nobody ever asks, if we don't get to
Right.
share, if we don't get to help others? So
Right.
then that wraps right back around to that point that a lot of people who are in leadership roles, they are busy, their time is valuable,
Mhm.
but many of them want to help. And I've never been turned away. When I've asked, I've never been turned away. It's always been, as long as I ask for specifically what I need and
Mhm.
I'm realistic about the time commitment and I don't try to like hang on, I don't be a
Right.
leech, right?
Yeah,
Thank
not
you for your
one more
help.
thing,
This
just
has
one
been
more thing.
wonderful. Yeah, yeah. Don't do the one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. Keep
Right.
it focused. Yeah.
But, and it's I think part of that also has a lot to do with how whenever people have been in those roles for such a long time and they've gained all this knowledge, like you just said, they want to be able to share it. So to have somebody that's kind of coming in, starry-eyed, I really am starting this journey and I want to know this thing. They're like, awesome. I would love to share this with you.
Absolutely.
So, but so I want to bring kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about something a little bit different. So y'all started off Army,
Yeah.
and by the time you finally were learning all like had I got Army figured out, nailed down, they go, "Hey, Space Force, how you like that?"
Yep.
So how did that transition feel for you? Because I mean,
Oh man.
those two things are completely different. Because like
Yeah.
as an Air Force family, like Space Force isn't that much different. It's like Space Force is like Air Force with more money. Like, and it's how was that transition for you come from being from the Army family to, hey, now you're Space Force?
The first little while it felt surreal. Because it all started during the COVID lockdown.
Right.
And we were in Northern Virginia for the COVID lockdown. So like it was really locked down.
Hmm.
And so that's when it all started. He went to work supporting the Space Force in January of 2020. As an Army officer, he wasn't
Right.
in the Space Force yet, but he was working in the Pentagon starting in 2020, January.
Hmm.
Like day one of the Space Force existing, he was there. It was surreal. We joked for the first couple of years, it felt like on any given day, we were either in a sitcom or a science fiction novel, but like nothing felt real.
Right.
And that was exacerbated by the fact that the whole world was shut down. So there was a surreality around that too. Like
Right.
that felt weird. Overall, it's been it's been kind of remarkable. I thought, I had spent a decade learning all the Army jargon. I had gotten to the point where if you told me you'd been stationed at a certain Army post, I would immediately be able to guess what MOS your spouse was, right? Like, oh, you were stationed there. You guys must be, um, artillery. You're
Right.
stationed there. Is your spouse a helicopter pilot? Like you just kind of know those things. You start to
Right.
figure out what those things indicate. And those are the kinds of things it takes years to build. That's the knowledge base. It takes a long time to build. I thought it would take a long time to build that in the Space Force. I also was really worried because I had built relationships. I
Mhm.
had those senior spouses who I knew were in my Rolodex,
Right.
so that when and if we hit certain points in his career that I wasn't sure how to navigate confidently, I could
Mhm.
reach out to them and say, okay, here's where we're at. What do I do? What
Right.
questions do I ask? How, like, did you guys hit this? I was very afraid I'd be alone. And here's what the turning point was for me. I had to get out of my house for this. Military
Mhm.
spouses, we've got to get out of our houses sometimes
Mhm.
to make these connections. But I went to a dinner one night, and it was again in Northern Virginia. We were in the National Capital Region.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of like brass in that area. And at the time, the
Yeah.
Space Force was still very small. So I got an invitation to go to a space spouse dinner. And I started looking at the names on the of the like the people who were RSVPing, and I didn't
Mhm.
know a lot of them. So I started asking my husband, do you know who, for example, Mary Thompson is? And he's like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's General DT Thompson's wife.
Mm-hmm.
He is basically the second in charge of the Space Force after General Raymond. And I went down the list like that, and there were
Mm-hmm.
several names that he knew. Well, those were the people who made up the spouses group then.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up at that particular dinner, I ended up sitting, I was kind of the last one in because our kids were still really little. We
Right.
still had like one that was still nursing maybe, or at least in diapers,
Mm-hmm.
and a toddler and like a first grader.
Right.
And so I was scrambling to try to get out of the house. I was the last one to get to the dinner. And when I got there, there really wasn't a seat open. But guess
Mm-hmm.
who literally made a space for me at the table? General D.T. Thompson's wife, Mrs. Thompson, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And she's become since then somebody who, like, when I see her, she knows me, she recognizes me, she
Right.
hugs me, she wants to know how Nick and the kids are, right?
Right.
She cares. And she literally like scooted over and
Mm-hmm.
pulled a chair up at the table for me. So people talk about, making room at the table.
Right.
Physically, literally, she helped make room at that dinner table for me
Mm-hmm.
so that I would feel like there was a spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then leaving the dinner, I connected with another spouse, and it turned out her husband and my husband were working together.
Hmm.
He was one rank above Nick, but they were working together in the same, on the same project at that
Mm-hmm.
time. So when we started talking, she's like, oh, Charlie's talked about Nick. And so
Mm-hmm.
I got home and I told Nick, like, I met, Jessica. And
Right.
he's like, oh my gosh, Charlie is wonderful. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy working with him. Well, fast forward just a few days, and Jessica reaches out to me and she's like, I know you're PCSing soon, because we had orders. We were
Right.
like, this is like our last 3 or 4 weeks in DC. And she said, I know you're PCSing soon, but we need to find a time that I can get you together with Leslie. And I'm like, I don't know who Leslie is. Like, I don't know these names, but okay.
Right.
Like, when somebody senior to you, like, see, senior spouse says,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to pull you in, you say, okay, I'm
Right.
in, let's do this. So we found like the one Sunday morning that the three of us had free, and they took me for breakfast. They wouldn't let me pay. They came armed with like this 3-inch binder,
Mm-hmm.
and they had printed out everything they could find about the Space Force. They had printed out, and they're like,
Nice.
and they got me a little black mole book, like a
Uh-huh.
moleskin, because at that time you couldn't buy Space Force stuff. Like the PXs and stuff didn't have
Right.
Space Force gear yet. So they'd taken this black notebook and they had printed out a picture of the Space Force Delta, like
Uh-huh.
the logo. They'd cut it out and they'd use packing tape and put a piece of packing tape over it. Still have it in my desk drawer. And they had like written me a note and all of this stuff. And they were like, you are not alone. And they told me to
Awesome.
get out my pencil and open up that moleskin. And they're like, here's
Mhm.
everything you need to know. And they started downloading to me as much and as quickly as they
Mhm.
could the key things that I needed to know about the unit Nick was going to be taking command of,
Mhm.
what they knew about the space community in Colorado Springs, who I might need to meet when I got here,
Mhm.
what services and support agencies existed because the Space Force is within the Department of the Air Force, right?
Right.
So all of our helping agencies are the same as those of Air Force families.
Mhm.
And these two spouses had been Air Force spouses for years.
Right.
I think Jessica and her husband have been married for 21 years. They just sent their youngest off to college.
Oh
She's been
wow.
doing this a long time, and Leslie's family is senior to Jessica's husband
Mhm.
and their family. So they've been doing this a long, long time. And they brought me in and they said, here's everything you need to know. And
Nice.
that was the moment where I realized my fears that I was going to lose my network. I was
Mhm.
going to be completely uninformed and walking into a squadron command spouse position.
Mhm.
All of a sudden I had these two people and they're like, here's my phone number,
Mhm.
put it in your phone, you text me, you call me, you need something, I'm here. And that has been that became that one dinner,
Right.
sitting next to Mrs. Thompson and then having these other two spouses say, we're going to take you under our wing, we're going to make sure you're okay.
Mhm.
That became my entry point, and I have been amazed. In the Army, it was so big, and the Space Force is so small.
Right.
So I thought I had a great network in the Army, and
Mhm.
now I look at the network in just a short period of time that I've been able to build in the Space Force because it's
Mhm.
so small. Um, it blows me away. But it's because a few of those people were generous with their time. They
Mhm.
saw a need, they anticipated my fears, and they helped fill that need before. I mean, I didn't even ask for anything. They just said, here's a
Here.
chair at dinner,
Right.
and we're going to take you for breakfast. And then
Mhm.
they came to breakfast armed with stuff to physically hand off to me because they knew
Right.
I'd be drinking with the fire hose. And
Yeah.
I would take it all in that conversation that we had. And then they gave me their cell phone numbers to make sure I
Mhm.
had like a phone a friend for
Right.
two different people. So I in the Army, I knew all kinds of people. Starting out as a Space Force squadron commander spouse, I had 2 phone numbers in my
Right.
Rolodex, but 2 is better than none, and it
Mm-hmm.
got me started, and that has made all the difference. So honestly, it's been a great, like, once we got through that phase of like, is today a Space Force science fiction novel kind of day? Or is today a Space Force sitcom kind of day? Which one's it going to be? Once we got through that phase
Uh-huh.
and I met a few people, they quickly made sure that my network multiplied and
Right.
that I had the support that I need. So I think it's a call to action to other spouses. You might not feel like that you are necessarily the most informed person in the room, but that doesn't mean that you don't know a whole lot more than that new spouse does.
Right.
And that it won't mean a ton to them if you say, come sit next to me,
Mm-hmm.
or here's my phone number. If you need anything, text me or call me.
Mm-hmm.
And I might not know the answer, but I might be able to help you find someone who does.
Right.
Right. Sometimes it's just that little bit that makes a huge difference. I honestly did not think I was going to be able to do this when he first told me that we were PCSing. And at the time, there's been a month of our life where he was up for promotion so he promoted in the Army, not the Space
Right.
Force, was current rank. He was up for promotion in the Army, but he had also put in a transfer packet that we didn't know yet if it was going to be accepted for
Mm-hmm.
him to join the Space Force. And because he didn't know which branch he was going to be in 6 months later, he
Right.
had put in for both battalion command in the Army and
Mm-hmm.
squadron command in the Space Force. And
Sorry
so
about
we're
that.
like, we have no idea we have no idea. And in the meantime, he's going TDY constantly for like 4 weeks, 6 weeks,
Right.
4 weeks to Vandenberg and into Peterson and Schriever to do all these
Mm-hmm.
space trainings because he wanted to make sure he was checking all the right boxes in
Right.
case he did transition to Space Force. And our house is on the market. So I'm like at home
Mm-hmm.
with 3 kids. He's gone all the time trying to get the house put on the market. And I don't even know if I didn't have a crystal ball. I did not
Right.
know if 2 months later we would be finding out we were getting, well, less than that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if we were going to be getting a Space Force command or a Army command or no
Mm-hmm.
command at all. And I didn't
Right.
know if he'd be commissioning into the Space Force or not. It was a crazy in that season, Mike. If you had called me and been like, "Friend, how are you?" I'd be like, "I'm
Oh my God.
I can't breathe. I can't stop crying. I can't do this." And that is the
Oh.
reality of the other side of all this. I mean, like for anybody who maybe is listening or watches this, like people tell me I seem like I'm really articulate and I seem like I've got it all together, but there are days
Mm-hmm.
and there are moments where the door is closed and the tears flow either to my mom or my husband or Mike. I think I even called you at one point and I was like, what do I do?
Yeah, we had a really good conversation.
Yeah. And I
Matter of
tried to
fact,
hold it together.
it was during COVID because I was still in Arkansas.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yep. So anyway, that's for me, that's how that whole transition to the Space
Mhm.
Force went. It has gone better than I could have expected. And um, healthcare is a lot better in the Department of the Air Force than it was in the Department of the Army. Maybe it just had to do with the specific duty stations I ended up assigned to, but I've been
Uh-huh.
blown away by how good the kids and I have had it in terms
Mhm.
of medical care since we joined the DAF family.
I think that also has a lot to do with where y'all are because y'all are in Colorado Springs, right?
We are.
Yeah, that's an excellent area, all just in and of itself. Man, so I like that. You were worried about your network getting smaller or just going away, and it grew.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is because somebody was willing to make room for you at the table. Like how much of that has that encouraged you to help want to make room for others because somebody was like, I want to help you. Do you feel like that's because people have shown you kindness and made room? Has that kind of
Yes.
like motivated you to go out and do the same thing for others?
100%. So I mentioned Mary Thompson
Yep.
a few minutes ago. Her husband retired about a week ago from the
Mhm.
Space Force and had a long and very respectable career. And she is one of the most down to earth, approachable, kind women. Like she's just wonderful. And I told her when I wished her farewell, I got to go, see her as part of her going away, and I had a card and everything for her. And part of what I told her in person and part of what I wrote in the card to her both was, "You leave a legacy of making space, creating space for younger people, and leaving what's coming behind you better than you found it." And I recognize that, like, I feel like that I've been entrusted with your legacy in
Mhm.
a small way, and that it is my responsibility to be the one now to say, here's a chair,
Mhm.
or here's my cell phone number, or here are the agencies you want to be aware of, for your family's needs. I feel like that the way that those more senior spouses have taken me under their wings and been a resource to me,
Mhm.
that if I didn't take that as a torch to carry with me and say, now I'm going to do the same for others,
Right.
it would be such a waste, might be a harsh word, but eventually we all retire from this lifestyle. Like, we
Mhm.
don't do this our whole lives.
Right.
That's the nature of the military. You don't stay in it forever. So if you get somebody who has made a really big impact on you, eventually they will leave this lifestyle,
Mhm.
and you might be the one who's there and can help that legacy live on. And I feel like there's responsibility in that. I
Gotcha.
maybe other spouses don't, I'm not sure, but I certainly feel that way. So to me, the way that those more senior spouses have welcomed me to the table, they
Mhm.
have pulled the curtain back a little bit for me to
Okay.
see what's ahead for us if we continue down this path
Mhm.
past, maybe 20 years. Um, that comes with responsibility.
Mhm. So I
So
think
yeah, I
one
take
one
it
thing
seriously.
one thing that's been a lot of fun for me, because like I said, we've with how long we've known each other, I've kind of witnessed your journey from new
Yeah.
spouse to now. One of the things that's been really fun for me has been seeing you really dive into the advocacy role in the last couple years.
Mhm.
Because I wish I had it up here with me, but I still have that Stein that you sent me from Germany.
Oh,
I
yes.
that's actually it's in the bourbon cabinet downstairs. So like I remember like Germany, Melissa, like coming back here, and then like in the last, I guess the last 3 years or so, you have really just dove head first, and like I don't like you're like a horse with your ears pinned back and you got the bit and you're just running with with being a spouse advocate.
Yeah.
And you've done three or four different really kind of big things that I can think of.
Yeah.
Like the one that you're going to for the
The
thing this
Aerospace and
weekend.
Cyber Conference.
Yeah, that with
Yeah.
was it the AFV? Is that what it is?
It's the AFA, so the Air and
AFA.
Space Forces Association, but their
Yeah.
acronym is AFA, and then the
Mhm.
task force is the F2 Task Force for
Mhm.
United Forces and Families.
But there's been that, and with all of your, and I see you on LinkedIn all the time with talking about military spouse employment. How have what do you see as some of the bigger hurdles to spouse employment from the advocacy side? Like what do you see as some things about that as a hurdle for spouses?
Oh man, there are a few. From an advocacy level, we have, and at the risk of getting a little bit political, we have politicians in leadership positions who are jerking our military families around. And if they don't see the importance of making sure that, I don't know, our senior most general officers in our various branches of service can have their nominations confirmed, and they don't recognize that there's a
Mhm.
trickle down effect to layer after a layer after a layer of military families beneath that who then
Mhm.
can't take on the next position,
Right.
or maybe they've already bought a house in the place they were supposed to be moving to take
Mhm.
on that position, but now they can't take that position and they have two mortgages for a
Right.
while. If we have politicians in the House and Senate that are that disconnected from the way that their decisions are affecting military families right now
Mhm.
and in the future, then I don't expect that they are going to be able to understand, if they don't even get that much,
Right.
right? How can I count on them to care from a legislative perspective that
Mhm.
military spouse employment matters? That's one challenge, right? And I think that there are people in um, elected political positions who absolutely do understand,
Mhm.
right? And so I don't mean to downplay them, but I think that systemically we have a lot of leaders who have no direct connection, that they didn't serve,
Mhm.
their spouses didn't serve, their kids aren't serving. They
Mhm.
don't know, they don't get it, they don't realize the challenges that we face. I think that's one of them. I think another one is that we have to tell our story. The civilian sector has to understand, number one, that military spouse unemployment and underemployment are a problem. Because if you went out and talked to, just randomly polled HR managers or hire like recruiters in different organizations, I don't know how many of them would even understand that there is a nationwide problem
Mhm.
with hiring this. We are not treated as an underserved population in the same way that some of the more traditionally identified underserved populations
Mhm.
are. And so if you asked an HR professional who are underserved populations in the United States that you should have maybe a different awareness of as you're going through
Mhm.
hiring and recruiting processes, military spouses probably wouldn't make the list.
Mhm.
And yet we are the single population in the United States with the highest and underemployment percentages.
Mhm.
So I think that's a challenge. If we could, I know the challenges can be overcome because I've seen it happen in my
Mhm.
other organization. If we could help civilian organizations understand that if they chose to place their values and their investment in understanding the military spouse unemployment and underemployment challenge, if they valued our service members, if they valued the fact that their civilian private organization can thrive because they can rely on our government and defense industry organizations keeping their freedoms free,
Mhm.
and those things are interdependent, if we could encourage them to place value then in hiring military spouses into roles that they are thoroughly qualified for, will affect mission readiness,
Mhm.
it will affect recruitment, and it will affect retention positively for the military communities. And those civilian organizations need the military to be able to do what it does in order for them to thrive.
Mhm.
And if we could figure out how to help those civilian organizations see that connection, I think that that would be huge. I think that's one of the places there is a disconnect, and there's a
Mhm.
political disconnect. And I think there's that disconnect with the civilian sector. And one of the things I've heard come up a lot in the conversations over the last year or so is that we're at the 50th anniversary of our all volunteer force.
Mhm.
If you look at draft era military families, many of them didn't stay in for 20 years.
Right.
Many of them were drafted, they did whatever term of service was required, and then they
Mhm.
got back out again. There were two things that happened as a result of that. One is that a lot of service members did not have a family when they served,
Mhm.
or if they did, their window of service, their spouse or their children may not have been a military family for a whole long time. It might not have
Mhm.
been their whole elementary school, years of moving
Mhm.
around or whatever. It was like 2 or 3 years, four
Mhm.
years, and then they got out and they transitioned over. The other thing that's affected by that is that if you looked at major companies following the draft era, when people were
Mhm.
getting out and transitioning to civilian work, there were veterans working in senior positions in almost every
Mhm.
company in the United States because almost all eligible men
Right.
served,
Mhm.
right? And so now, because we're an all volunteer force, you look around at civilian organizations and even government organizations, and many of the people who are in leadership positions have never served and their
Right.
spouses have never served. And so this whole set of problems that we face that are very real for us are a little bit distant for them. It's not as close to home for them. And that means that we have to figure out ways to articulate the challenge,
Mhm.
help them see the solutions, and help them see, most of all, what the why is. Why does it matter? It matters for security. It matters for retention and recruitment of our armed forces. It also, if you hire military spouses and you can be flexible with them, it is a distinguisher of your values. It becomes a distinguisher for you as a company and how you market your available positions to
Mhm.
spouses, to anybody, right? If you show that you have that value and you act upon that value, that's good. In today's climate, business wise, that's a good thing because people want that social responsibility. And that's what that is. When you can transparently say, these are my values as a company, I'm going to hire based on those values. I'm going to train based on those values. I'm going to try to retain my talent based on those values. That's good for you as a business too.
Mhm.
So those are, I mean, I think there are political challenges. I think that there are challenges related to the disconnect between the civilian workforce and the military. And I think there's just a fundamental challenge in even organizations understanding that one of the biggest unemployment problems we have in the United States ties back to military families.
Do you also think that maybe some companies have this fear of hiring a military spouse because they're like, oh, if I hire a military spouse, you're leaving in
Yep.
like 2 years? Because I know that a company cannot legally not hire somebody because they're a military spouse.
Mhm.
Like that is a known, that's a thing. But I know like I had an interview for a position whenever we were in Georgia, and was on my second interview with this company. And in that interview, the first one was the Zoom call. The second was actually a face to face because this was still in the early, like I guess not early days of COVID, but we hadn't been in Georgia very long. And I know whenever they got to the question of like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I was like, well, I'm a military spouse. I honestly don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. Was that probably the best way to go about that question? No, but the tone of that interview shifted
Yeah.
almost instantly. Like you to the point where you could practically feel the tension build in the room, like they were ready to
Yeah.
move on.
Yep. And then now they have to figure out how to like sustain the interview out of courtesy,
Right.
but their intention is no longer what it
And
was.
the bad thing is, or the thing that I found interesting about the how it changed was one of the guys in there what had been in the Marine Corps. So I was like, out of everybody in the room, that guy should have understood. And maybe he did. I don't know. But I know the tension in the room changed. So do you think that there's that more education for some of these companies about what the benefits they are getting from a
Yeah.
military spouse would help? Because I go back to what you were saying earlier about you had a 1 month span where you had no clue what was going on. You still had to get all these things going, still had to live life, still had to do all these things, connect all these
Yeah.
dots, make sure all this stuff happened. If there's one thing I know about military spouses, we figure it out and we make it happen.
Yes.
If there was a way to get companies to understand that, do you think they would be
Yeah.
more willing to hire military spouses and not look at the shortfalls,
I think so. And I think the other part of it is non-military spouses don't stay with jobs like they used to.
especially now?
And I think a lot of companies don't want to face that,
Mm-hmm.
that people leaving their company is like that people are leaving or people are sitting on the clock networking on LinkedIn or scrolling job boards because they're always looking. They're not, they don't trust the company.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't trust the company. They want to continually better themselves. They know that the best opportunities for promotion typically happen when you leave one company and move to another company while you're still employed by the first one. Right? Your best negotiation leverage for salary or benefits or whatever perks you're looking for in your position come when you're already gainfully employed. And so people are always like, if you've got an ambitious employee, there's a good chance they're already aware of or actively searching their next opportunity. I don't have the statistics to support that. I've heard other people cite them. I don't know them off the top of my head, but the number of people who are staying with jobs for like 2 years now before they move on is higher than it's ever been. And I think that if we had better data from organizations that are employing military spouses to show how long they stay with the organization or how long they stay with the organization compared to how long they could stay with the organization, right? If you're going to move and the job is on site and you can't take it with you, then you
Mm-hmm.
can't help the fact that you get your orders, right? Then
Right.
you have to decide, are we going to geobatch or are we going to stay together? If
Mm-hmm.
we're going to stay together, I have to leave the job, right? Those decision matrices are pretty simple at that
Mm-hmm.
point. If we knew, if we had data to say that, military spouse could have been in this role for 27 months and they stayed
Mm-hmm.
in that role for 27 months to the
Right.
day. I mean, they were still working for that company the day that moving truck pulled up outside because they know how fortunate they are to have good employment, right? If we had those statistics to back things up, I think that it would be eye-opening to see how much more, in my experience, we are grateful for opportunities that come
Mm-hmm.
to us. We are also likely to follow through on our commitments. That's
Mm-hmm.
drilled into us as a military family. We have to clear housing a certain way. We can't stop at 3/4 of the way to clearing military housing,
Right.
or it's just not. We have to clear housing the right way. We have to do the right paperwork every time
Mm-hmm.
a deployment is coming up. We have to follow the right processes when a PCS comes up. Like, we are trained to follow through on procedure from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that then becomes something that's ingrained in us to follow through on our professional commitments or our personal commitments in other areas too. So I think that, part of it is just that I don't think a lot of civilian companies are realistic about what their turnover is going to be for civilian employees.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're comparing what they're imagining the worst cases for this military spouse against what they are kind of like rainbows and unicorn,
Mm-hmm.
imagining their best case scenario is for a civilian spouse or a civilian employee.
Right.
And that's not an apples to apples comparison. The average civilian employee is probably not going to be there for as long as they want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the average military spouse may stay longer than they think they're going to stay. But that's not how they're looking at it in the interview. Right. They're thinking of it like this,
mm-hmm.
right? There's a bias towards a civilian spouse and a bias against the military spouse. That's tough. I think that organizations like Hiring Our Heroes and Blue Star Families and others are doing a better job than I've ever seen in all my years of doing this at doing quantitative and qualitative research so that we have the numbers to support some of these things that we know anecdotally. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll start seeing more numbers that show quantitatively that a military spouse employee is likely to be a really good employee, both in terms of like the workload produced, but also the longevity of employment. But I'll add to that. I heard someone say, it's been 2 weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago, I heard someone speak and they said something that really stuck with me. They said, military spouses, never let yourself feel like a company is doing you a favor by hiring you.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of us are overqualified for the jobs we're applying to,
right.
and that kind of thing. And that really stuck with me, that like, yes, we appreciate those opportunities, but we need to be sure that we hold our value and that we don't feel like we have to undersell ourselves or accept less than we're worth because they're doing us a favor by hiring us.
Yeah, I know that's one thing that I hear from a lot of spouses is they may have a degree and they may have an advanced degree in something, but they take a job as like a GS5, and they're just because it's either what they could find, but they're so thankful to have the job that a lot of them stop looking like, nope, I'm good here. I've got a job. It's like, but you could be working, and I know I'm using the GS pay scale because that's what I'm the most familiar with, but it's like you're working a job making $32,000 a year whenever you could easily be making 75 to 80. But why? And I think a lot of, like you just said, a lot of spouses, they're like, well, I'm just so grateful to even have this opportunity. It's like, you're not doing yourself any favors by sticking with this other one.
Yeah, and you're not doing favors to the spouses that will follow behind you either. And I think a lot of times when we're in those positions, we're not thinking about the precedent we're setting. We're just thinking about the moment. Oh my gosh, I've applied to X number of positions and I finally found something. And they're not hating on me because I'm a spouse, right? Like they're gonna take me in. And so we kind of lose that perspective. But I think it's important to try to remain as empowered as you can through that process. And it's a hard thing to say because the job search process can be so just soul crushing.
Yeah, it is very daunting.
Yeah. And I think too, like one of the things that we've seen is I've told Nick, I don't know how many times over the years, I'm all in on him in our marriage and supporting his career, as long as we both still feel like that's part of where we're being called to go and that we feel purpose in his work and all of that. But that it is unfair in our marriage for him to look at me or my career and not recognize that I have parameters I have to work within that are forced upon me by our choice for him to stay active duty. Right. And I say our choice because I'm not a victim in that. Like he and I make those decisions together. We are in this together. But the consequence of that is I have like these, I feel like sometimes I'm in a box. I have to have remote, or I have to at least have hybrid, or then we're having to deal, like, even if I could find something locally, we only know for sure that we're in this duty station through June of next year. Right. So if I were to take a job locally right now and they couldn't promise me that I could work hybrid or remote afterwards, there's a chance I could be in that job for less than a year before moving again. Right. And so then, okay, it almost has to be remote. It almost has to be something that is flexible to me being the primary caregiver, because there are days, and he is better than a lot of service members, and his situation is better than that of a lot of service members, but still there are days and times where he cannot make a schedule. Right. He has to be at the place they tell him to be at when he needs to be there. And sometimes those places are very far away.
Hmm.
like other countries,
Yeah.
right? So I am the primary caregiver for 3 young children.
Right.
So I have to make sure my job supports that. And when I start adding those factors up that our family has established for ourselves through our commitment to his service, it it makes me feel pretty limited sometimes. It
Hmm.
definitely makes me feel sometimes like I have to rethink what it means for me to live to my full potential. Because if
Hmm.
I only identified my full potential as my professional full potential, I
Hmm.
would feel like that the military was life was holding me back. So I
Right.
have to kind of continue to redefine myself a little bit on, you know, level set my expectations some along the way, right? That
Yeah.
my full potential is not just in being a professional. My full
Hmm.
potential is also in being a mom
Hmm.
and a wife to a great guy and being a good neighbor to my neighbors, being a
Hmm.
volunteer in my kids' school. Like there are so many things about me as a person that I can lean into differently because he's in the military.
Hmm.
Place lives I can touch, places I can volunteer my time or my skills. Um, and all of that allows me to reach my full potential in different ways. So I have to kind of constantly reframe that too. I'm
Hmm.
not sure if that'll resonate with other families, but there are days where I feel like I'm just kind of being held back
Hmm.
professionally. And I have to remind myself that just because I feel like that I might not be able to reach my full potential professionally does not mean that I can't reach my full potential as a human being,
Right.
being married to an active duty
Hmm.
service member.
No, and that's really great because I think a lot of spouses they do get caught up in what is my identity. This is my identity is this thing that I do,
Yeah,
but it's not. It's a lot bigger than that. You're like you said, you're not just a you know a professional. You're a mom. You're a volunteer. You're a wife. You're all these things. You know that's all of that makes up who you are and what you can eventually be. Not just no, this is me.
that's right. I think you embody that, Mike. I mean, I see, and you challenge gender norms in the process. Right? I mean, like, I can't imagine being a male military spouse. I think the experience is probably really different in a lot of ways than being a female military spouse because people probably, I don't know, like in so many ways, but you do that every day. You embody that your value is in being, you're a great dad. Your investment in
Well,
you and
thanks.
Kelly's girls is amazing. And she's a great mom too,
Hmm.
right? But not all men put out their dadness the way that you do. And it is so cool to see that. And I think that's a great model for me. I mean, like I'm a woman and I see that and I think, you know what? It's okay for me to be a mom.
Hmm.
I don't, for many, many decades, professional women have felt like they've had to choose between being a mom or being a professional,
Right.
right? And in today's day and time, we can do both. We can be great parents and we
Hmm.
can be great professionals too. I think you embody that and you embody support for Kelly without your identity being entirely in Kelly, right? Your
Right.
entire identity is not being a military spouse. You're a CrossFitter, you're a weightlifter, you're actually, are you a CrossFitter or am I making that up?
No, I'm
You're a weightlifter.
a power lift. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think about the home gym and like my mind jumps to like workouts today. So you're doing powerlifting, you've done triathlons, you're raising great girls. So you're a girl dad and you happen to also be a military spouse,
Hmm.
and you've stood behind Kelly through, my goodness, so many deployments. Like every time I turned around for a while, it seemed like, yeah, she's home, but she's leaving again,
Yeah.
she's leaving again.
Whenever we were in
And you've
Georgia,
done
she
that with a
was
lot of grace and strength.
I appreciate that. Yeah, when that was whenever we were in Georgia, we were there for 3 years, and she deployed back. She deployed twice back to back. This will be the first. So my oldest daughter, Caitlin, her birthday's coming up. This will be the first birthday in the last 2 years that Kelly's been home for,
It's so tough.
and
And
it's
you've held it down, right? And I'm sure you've had to hold it down for Kelly too, because I'm sure that's been really hard for her to be gone.
oh yeah,
And so I'm only imagining that like this shoulder's got tears on it from one daughter, and this shoulder's got tears on it from the other daughter, and there are tears coming through the phone
Mhm.
because Kelly probably wants more than anything to be there with you guys celebrating your daughter's birthday. And you're the one who has to hold it together and soak in all of that and also plan a party and make
yeah,
sure your daughter's getting a cake and the
yeah.
things are brought to the school for whatever they're doing there. And not all people can manage all of that. And not all men, I don't think, can do that in a way that they're comfortable with. Can like say, like me being there for my daughter and planning her birthday party, like I still have like the beard And I power, like, I'm a dude, right? But I'm also a great dad and I'm a great husband. And I think that I think you embody that in a way that I hope that other male military spouses can see and say, okay, I can do this too. Like there's purpose for me in this life. I don't necessarily have to be the primary breadwinner to be like one like extremely important figure in the life of all the people around me, right? And you do that. So
That's awesome. Thanks for that. I appreciate you. We yeah, so and one thing that is different from us, like, so whenever Kelly and I got married, we got married right after I graduated from undergrad. So we got married in 2004.
yeah.
But then Kelly didn't join the Air Force until 2010.
She was a veterinarian first, wasn't she?
Well, she went to vet school. She graduated from vet school, and then her I guess it was her last year of vet school she found out that she could go Air Force and do public health, and that's what she decided to do. So we were married for 6 years before she joined.
Oh, that is
And that
interesting.
see,
That sounds
and I get that from a lot, because most people don't know. Most people are like, what do you mean y'all were married before she joined?
yeah.
So our relationship was, and through that whole time, I was the primary breadwinner.
And you guys dated all through college, right? So weren't you guys together for like 3 or 4 years before you
Yeah,
got married?
we actually met, and this time frame, this timeline will make sense to you. We met like the week after Christmas Fest,
Yeah.
my sophomore year. So for anybody that's listening, is like, what did we mean Christmas Fest? There's in Natchitoches, there's a giant Christmas festival.
hmm
The it's
The Festival of Lights, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a festival of lights, and we just all called it Christmas Fest. But it
For
was
anybody who doesn't know that area, it's the Steel Magnolias reference. It always works for me. I'm like,
yeah,
remember in Steel Magnolias, there's that like Christmas party they all go to? Like it's
yep,
a festival.
that's that's exactly what it is. But so we met right after Christmas Fest, my sophomore year,
Okay.
and
So you guys
so
were together for 2.5 years before you
yep,
got married.
yep, we do. So we
Yeah, so you guys
dated.
have got a lot of years under your belt.
Yeah, so we are coming up on next summer, or this coming summer will be 20 years of marriage for us.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations.
Well, thanks, appreciate that. And but I say all that because my identity, I did have to have a big identity shift,
hmm
because I went from being the primary breadwinner, and for the first couple of years that Kelly was in the Air Force, as a younger officer, I was still the primary breadwinner because I was making more money than she was. It wasn't until we went to Maryland for her to get her MPH, and we're like, okay, we're only going to be here for a year. Now, by the time we got there, we had both of our girls. Both of our
hmm
girls were born in Louisiana, so we got that going for me. But so whenever we got there, it's like, okay, we're going to be here for a year. Childcare in Maryland, it's pretty sure
it's
it's so high.
yeah.
It
We
is.
actually that's a we could talk about childcare and military spouse employment and like when
Yeah.
to invest. But yes, we did childcare in Northern Virginia, and I'm sure it's just about the same
Yeah,
cost.
it's nuts. And we knew there was not going to be anything that I could find work wise that was going to pay enough to justify the cost of childcare.
Yeah.
So I went from being the primary breadwinner to a stay-at-home dad. And that is about as giant of an about face as I have ever experienced in my life.
And it's not like you probably got a lot of other men in your life who've made that shift who you could like talk to because they're
Yeah,
not a lot. That's not a common, I don't know, that's not a common story.
it's not. And then on top of that, we weren't at a base. So she was going
Yeah.
to school at Walter Reed. We were living in Gaithersburg. So she would take the metro every day. So for that year, even though she was still active duty, still put on her uniform to go to school, we weren't we didn't have that military community to lean on.
hmm
And everything that I went to with the kids was mommy and me, mommy's day out, and then here's me. It's like, hey guys, here to pick my kid up. And when I tell you the looks that I got, like going, because when my oldest had started gymnastics at that point, she was like a year and a half old. No, she was 2 years old. And for the first day of gymnastics, you're like, okay, here for mommy and me, and it's like, hey, I'm here with my daughter. They're like, oh, it's like, so yeah, it was a giant mindset shift to be able to be okay with that. So I hear you say stuff like, being able to do all this stuff that's non-traditional, non-traditional roles. It took a lot of work. It takes a lot of self-reflection. Took a lot of being able to sit back and being able to be okay with it,
Yeah.
which is not easy, especially not for somebody with a very traditional upbringing of, no, you're a guy, this is what guys do, breadwinner, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But it's definitely been a ride.
But you're doing it. And I mean, think about the number of, even with your podcast and interactions you've had with families and the different installations you guys have been associated with. Think about all the lives you've touched and all the people, including little girls and little boys who you've been the dad in the room. And you never know which of those people your story is stuck with. One of my best friends, I was born and raised in a small town and like knew all the same kids the whole time I was growing up. And one of them, her family's all still there. She was pretty much my first best friend. We went to kindergarten together, and I went over to their house for the first time. And I had a very traditional home, right? Like kind of what you'd expect, like out in the country. But like you walked into the house and it looked like a normal house, right? There was a TV in the family room and like couches and just kind of what you would expect of a normal home. Well, I walked into this friend's house, and in their family room, there was no television. And instead of like normal furniture, there were cinder block bookcases, floor to ceiling, covering the longest wall in the room. And it was filled with just animals. They had a boa constrictor, they had gerbils, they had all. And so her world was so different than mine.
Right.
And you went to the next room over, and again, there was no television. It was like like a sitting room, but there was no television. And instead, they had all these educational toys. Their mother was an early childhood education person, and so she knew how important it was for the kids to have access to educational stuff. It was the first home I'd ever walked into that had a map on the wall, right? Where I got to like, it had this big map on the wall. And if I remember correctly, I think it was interactive. Somehow it had like lights or something in it. But anyway, there was no television. And you fast forward years later, we're at NSU. My first semester, I brought a TV to college with me, and all my roommate ever wanted to do was watch TV. So I'd be sitting there trying to study or trying to get, like mostly trying to study because most of my practicing was happening in the practice rooms or in rehearsals. But this is before noise canceling headphones and stuff like that. And I couldn't focus. And so when Thanksgiving came around and I drove back home for Thanksgiving, I took my TV back home. And that was the last time I had a TV in my family room. We still don't have a TV in our family room. We have a second sitting room, like in our basement. But when you walk into our living area, like where it's most convenient to watch TV, we don't have a TV. And that's because of an influence that affected me in kindergarten. Right. And so you don't even know what little girls or little boys were in those gymnastics gyms during Mommy and Me or whatever, and saw a daddy there and thought, little boy thinking, I want to be the daddy who goes to, to gymnastics with my kids, or a little girl who thinks my husband someday could take my kids to gymnastics, or, maybe not, they're not even thinking that at the moment, but fast forward and they get to a point in their lives where they're thinking about what their adult life is going to look like. And somewhere in the back of their mind, they have planted that it's okay for daddies to be at Mommy and Me events. Or better yet, maybe they're the one who owns the gymnastics gym and they call it, Mommy or Daddy and Me, or Parent and Me.
That's going to be my little one. My little one my oldest doesn't do gymnastics anymore. My little one she's doing her first year of team gymnastics. She wants to be a gymnastics coach. And so if any of them own a gymnastics place, it's going to be Lizzie.
So it must be her schedule that you referenced the other day. Like,
yes. Oh my.
To get that schedule. Gosh. I had just gotten our daughter's cheer schedule, like maybe 2 days before that. And I had the same feeling of, there goes our winter. Like it's good. It's for the right reasons and it's good. And it's going to be good, but it sure does. It's a wake up call coming out of a very unscheduled summer.
Oh man.
To realize like, we have one weekend.
So did you see DC's comment on that when he was like, I feel this?
Oh yeah, I did. Yes. Yeah. Cause his daughter has shifted to dive now, but.
Oh, did she? I know she was doing like
one of their girls shifted to diving because she had so many injuries with maybe both their girls were gymnasts, but I think one of them had had so many repeat injuries to like
Uh-huh.
a knee or an ankle or something that she had shifted to diving instead for the lower impact, but still getting to use a lot of the
Right.
same tools.
Yeah, he was the first person I thought of whenever I got the schedule. I know, now I know how DC feels.
Speaking of DC and you, I can't help but notice there's some gray in here now
That's
that
that
didn't
that
used
is
to be there.
white, darling. That is not gray. That is white.
And I noticed in DC's like retirement, now that he's retired from the
Mhm.
military and he's got his beard growing in, it's
Right.
all white. And I clearly we're not that old. So I don't know how this is happening.
So whenever Kelly deployed the first time, whenever we were in Alaska, I started growing out what I called my deployment beard.
Uh-huh.
So because she hates when I have a really long beard. She doesn't mind this length, but if it's
Yeah.
longer, she does not like it at all. And so it was super long, and my boss was like, "You got something white on your beard? Did you draw something?" I was like, "No, that's hair. Thanks, I appreciate it."
I'm just lucky. My hair is white enough that the gray isn't showing much. And so
Mhm.
people will be like, no, you're not gray. And I'm like,
You're
actually
like,
I am. And they're like, oh, you are. But my hair is so sandy. It just kind of,
just kind of
at
blends
some
in.
point, I'll be gray instead of being blonde. But for a little while, at least it's hiding.
Every time my girl's like, when did your beard start to change color? I was like, the older y'all get, the whiter it gets.
Yeah. Every time you give me attitude, 2 more black hairs go white.
That's my oldest. Like I said, she's about to turn 11, so it was only like this much of it was white, like just last week. So
Yeah. Mine started
preteens
during
are the
COVID.
best.
Mine totally started during COVID, like that lockdown year of
Mm-hmm.
we sent our boys, we kept everybody home for a little while, but when we could, we sent our boys back to preschool. But our
Mm-hmm.
first grader was having some fine motor skills issues
Mm-hmm.
and was in occupational therapy and stuff. And we're like, we can't put her in online school.
Right.
She'll fall so far behind on like how to hold a pencil, how to
Mm-hmm.
manage scissors. We've got to have her using her fine motor skills this year, or she's really smart, but she's going to fall behind on the physical stuff. And it's going to cause lots of problems in second and third grade when she needs to be able to like, she gets a worksheet and she has a
Mm-hmm.
small spot to put an answer in and she can't
Right.
write in that hole. So we kept her home and homeschooled her that year. In homeschooling while working full time, and that company that I mentioned that we grew and sold, we
Mm-hmm.
sold it on April 1st, 2020.
Oh
So
wow.
if you remember where you were on April 1st, 2020, it was not a happy time for most of us, right?
No.
So recently under lockdown with the whole family had sold the company, learning my new role as an employee of the parent company now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that year that the grays started to pop in. Not surprising.
Not surprising at all.
No.
So what do you feel for you has been the most rewarding thing about diving into spouse advocacy, specifically like spouse? I know we're kind of we kind of got
Yeah.
off on a tangent there, which is one of my favorite things about my podcast because I just dive down rabbit holes and start having conversations. But as far as like what have you gotten the most like personal fulfillment from doing your advocacy role?
I think building a successful military spouse employment program in my previous company,
Mm-hmm.
the company that I had co-owned and we sold, um, I saw the difference it made for some military families. We had some people that I had hired that were working for us that were either a little bit older, so they'd had more of a nest egg built up, or maybe their spouses were like, we had one at least whose spouse was a field grade officer.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had some people on my team who were, even though they weren't necessarily among the highest paid employees in our company, they may have still been the primary breadwinner in their family because their
Mm-hmm.
spouse was still a younger enlisted service member.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt so good to know that we supported those families in the ways that mattered to them, and not just financially. Like, we would do things in our handbook. We said things like, we believe that your family's service to the military
Mm-hmm.
is something that we shouldn't take for granted. And so while you're accruing sick leave and vacation time, we want you to be able to use your sick leave and vacation time when you're sick or taking a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want you to have to use your accrued vacation time to go get powers of attorney made prior to a deployment, right? Or to go attend your husband's or your wife's reenlistment ceremony or
Mm-hmm.
change of command ceremony or something like that. And so our policy was just that if you had orders, orders to deploy, orders to PCS, orders to change, like for a change of command or something like that, or reenlistment, or a commissioning or a promotion, whatever. Like if you had orders, that we would not force you to use your vacation time to go take care of what you need to take care of as a military family. And that was our way of saying thank you for your service, right? And I think a lot of companies are like, thank you, veterans, but they don't actually do much. Or they'll say, thank you, military families, but there's nothing they're doing that directly actually makes a difference. And the best way you can say thank you is to do something, like show someone, give action.
Right.
I think we did a respectable job. I'm sure there's always a way you can do something better, but I think we did a respectable job in trying to see transferable skills, hire and train military spouse talent, be at peace with the fact that not all talent will stay with us forever, that we might be a stepping stone and that somebody might move on to something that's more of their dream job later on. And that's part of the process too. I feel good about that. I feel like that for the most part, we were a positive influence on military families who had a spouse working for us, either financially or as a career stepping stone or as a flexible organization. We were not the best paying organization out there, but we were able to compensate through flexibility in our policies that I just described to hopefully meet many military spouses where they needed to be met to make career and military family life work. And, like I'm not like I'm not like a super churchy or like overtly religious person, but I am a person of faith. And I believe that this is part of my purpose, right? I believe that I have been, these doors have opened and I'm on this path in part because this is where I am meant to be.
Right.
And that someday I'll meet my maker. And I'm sure my maker's gonna have plenty of complaints about what I didn't do right. But one of the places that I feel like I will be able to really be at peace is that I have done my best to make things better for those families whose lives I was empowered to touch through a military spouse employment program. And my hope then through the advocacy work that I do in a volunteer capacity is that I can use that to help show others how it could look so that they can have that same thing. So that to me is, I truly feel like that I did everything that I knew how to do with the skills and the experiences I had at the time that I was making those decisions to make things better for others. And that's something that I feel really blessed to have been able to do, right? It's not about me. It's about like, I'm a conduit for this. Somehow I've had the right experiences and I've had the right mentors. And I'm in this leadership position. And so I can make change that, like you asked me earlier, how do you feel about, like passing the torch on to other people? It's a responsibility.
Right.
When you land in that leadership role and you can influence change and you've had these life experiences and you've had these, all these things culminate, then you're just the conduit for it. And if you choose not to do something with it, then you're going to have to live with that. And I chose to do something with it. And that is something I think I can be, I don't know if proud is the right word, but like at peace with, very much at peace with. And I hope that I'm able to continue to impact change in similar ways in both the next position that I'm moving into and through the volunteer advocacy work that I do.
See, that's awesome because, you were just saying like, you've been at the right space, been in the right places, met the right people. And I hear so much the naysayers and the ones that like to sit, oh, they got lucky. It's like, no, a little bit of luck was involved there, but then the people that say, well, I could have done that same thing if I had been given the same opportunities, but they probably wouldn't have because they don't have the right attitude about it. Whereas you were given the opportunity, you reached it, not just given the opportunity, but some of these opportunities you sought out and made those connections because you were brave enough to do that. That has helped other people go, well, I already know she's going to do the next thing. Otherwise she wouldn't have came in the first place.
I think there's something there with like, part of it is knowing that it's not all about you. Right. Like if you and your family are a family who chooses to be involved in in military service, it's service, right? It's not about us. It's about something bigger than us. And I think that as a spouse, the more we can embody that, and that's not to say that like we don't deserve good pay or we don't deserve jobs with benefits, or like I'm not saying any of that to say that we should minimize our value, but our value is inherently tied to service and a sense of purpose in serving others, right? And I think that that is the attitude you just described that some people have. I think when I've encountered that type of an attitude, it has almost always been because the core mindset is not that our family is committed to our one person's military service. It is that we're looking at the military thing as a job.
Right.
It's transactional. It's a job. We could make more money if we went to work for the contractor down the road that works with the government, or working in a government civilian job. Sometimes you can make more money than you can as even an officer in the military. When you start looking at this life as being about the job,
Mhm.
to me, that's when the attitude shifts and it can get real toxic real fast.
Mhm.
It's really for us about a sense of purpose in serving others.
Mhm.
And that when that purpose feels like it shifts, then we need to get out of this lifestyle.
Right.
Because that's when we're going to start having resentment. That's when we're going to start having bitterness. Because if you look at this as just a job, it will not compete to the like it might compete to some of the civilian opportunities out there.
Mhm.
But for most of us, it's not. For most of us, if we start looking at it as just a job, just transactional, just about the money and the benefits package, then assuming that you and your spouse are both educated and qualified to do other things, you can make more money, you could get better benefits, and you could have more stability going elsewhere.
Mhm.
So for me, it really, a lot of it just comes down to faith that I met him for a reason,
Mhm.
right? And he already had that sense of service to country. And that's become part of our family's values, is service to others, not just in
Mhm.
military, but in all that we do. And as long as that feels like that's part of our purpose, then everything else that I have the opportunity to touch or do, it's not about me, it's just moving
Right.
through me. I just happen to be the person who is in the right place at the right time. And you're right, has been, I'm not shy. I'll introduce
Mhm.
myself to people, I'll put myself out there, I'll actively try to cultivate my network
Mhm.
and think about where the points are that I could help make a difference. But it is not fundamentally about him or me or us moving ahead.
Mhm.
It's about how can we provide for our own family and be responsible to our own family's circumstances while also following this sense of purpose towards service.
Mhm.
I don't know. That might sound like a little bit Pollyanna, but it
No.
doesn't feel like when I talk about it and I think about it, it feels actually like a lot of responsibility. It doesn't
Mhm.
feel light or fluffy. It feels like, oh crap, God, you trust us and we got to do the right thing with this stuff. And
Right.
man, what if we mess up? Like, what if I say the wrong thing? Or what if
Mhm.
somebody thinks like, oh, this is a lot of responsibility. It doesn't feel light and Pollyanna.
Right.
It feels like a calling. It feels like a purpose.
And you've kind of hinted around it a few times, and I think this is one thing that a lot of people, and I'll say our network, because we do know a lot of the same people,
Yeah.
but a lot of the people in our network have this desire, and I think it's actually a Girl Scout saying where you leave it better than you found it. Like
Huh.
we go into
Yeah, maybe.
something and we see it, and we see what we want to leave the place knowing it's a little bit better than when we got there. We did something to help improve stuff for the people coming behind us.
Where do you think that comes from? You think it comes from our parents? Do you think it comes from, I mean, I think about when you said that, I immediately thought of NSU
Uh-huh.
and Ken Green always saying, put everything all the way away.
Right.
And I actually say that to my kids every day when we go home from activities. I'm like, put everything all the way away.
Yep.
But making sure that if you've been in the practice room, you leave it better than you found it. If you've been in
Mhm.
the band hall, practicing that everything gets put away all the way away,
Mhm.
nothing is left behind, right? Everything is better than you found it. That's one of the associations I have with that concept, but I'm sure it started before that. So where do you think it comes from?
I don't, it might be a band thing, but I know because like, do you tell your kids to be early is to be on time?
So I don't, but Nick does. And so that's a whole conversation. He is really, really, really strict on time.
Uh-huh.
It's actually like, it's like a value for him.
Mhm.
The only time I've ever seen him cry was because I made us late for a tax appointment,
Mm. Okay.
because he felt so devalued by
Mhm.
me not being prepared and on time
Mhm.
for a tax appointment our first year together, that like that's the only time I've ever hurt him enough that he's
Hmm.
cried. Okay, so that like it's a time
Mhm.
is something that is really important to him.
Mhm.
And so I actually sometimes, to balance us out, am more the voice of like moderation where time is concerned, like
Gotcha.
trying to help the kids understand that yes, there are times and places where you must be early
Mhm.
or on time. And that other times and places, it's okay to not, like, we don't need to be crying because we're so stressed about being there on time. It's
Right.
okay to like take a deep breath and okay, we'll just be there 3 minutes late.
Hmm.
Right. So, but that is a marital dynamic thing
Yeah.
for us, you know?
Because I just remember we always heard that, like, to be early is to be on time, to be on time is to be late.
Hmm.
I heard that. I mean, I started hearing that in junior high because it
You
was
don't
like
show up late for rehearsal.
yeah, like if downbeat's supposed to be at 8 and you're just now getting to the band hall at 8, you're late.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know, because I know, like, my mom. So I was a single only child raised by a single parent. So, like, it was always just me and my mom, and I know she was always very particular about, like, having a home for stuff. Like, okay, if you can't just set stuff down, it's got to have a home to go to.
Yeah.
It's like if she saw my desk right now, like, she would probably be freaking out. Like, why is there a book on, like, I've got like two different books on my desk, but it's because I needed them here.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I definitely think that, like, whenever we go places, like, there's always a desire to know that whenever we leave, that not necessarily that I made an impact, but just that I know I left it a little better than I found it. I really don't know where that started or
Yeah. I
why,
think you're
but
right. I think a lot of our friends share that same value. But I can't think of where it's, I mean, I think of my dad and my mom a lot and the way that they taught us, the way that they not just in their words, but also in their actions, like the
mhm,
way that they took care of things. It's interesting. I think that there is a common thread, and I do see that same value with a lot of the people
mhm,
that we marched with. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and a lot
mhm,
of them that I've stayed in touch with. And I see it with some of my closer friends.
mhm. Well, I'm also thinking, like you and I both know Heather Campbell, and she's an amazing individual. But that everywhere she goes, she tries to make sure that she leaves it a little bit better than she found it. It's like I think about people
Yeah.
like that, and we're from all different backgrounds, all different areas, but we also a lot of people seem to have that same, the spouses that are out there trying to make an impact, trying to do the good things, all seem to kind of have a little bit of that going for them. So it's just very interesting. That's something I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know where it all stems from, but
I think you
yep.
have a subject for a pod. I think you need to bring like two or three people together who you
Hmm.
think are doing that and have a conversation about that for an episode at some point. Because it'd be interesting for that to be this like, why is it that we want to leave it better than we found it?
Right.
Because you're right. I was just chatting earlier this morning via text with Hiba Abdullah, who's a military spouse of the year for the
Hmm.
Air Force. And she's stationed in Germany right now, but she and I are on the F2 task force together through Air and Space Forces Association. And her background is in government relations and lobbying. She was a staffer in
Hmm.
DC before she met her husband. Her husband's a musician actually for the Air Force,
Oh, fun.
and so she's somebody to introduce you to at some point. But she's one who I think tries to leave it better than she found it.
Hmm.
The task force chair for F2, Lindsay Akers, like she's one of those people. She's
Hmm.
just I wouldn't even say that I think she's one of those people who I know
Right.
she is leaving it better than she found it. You're right. Like everybody that I think of who is making a difference, and even, I referenced Mary Thompson earlier. One of the things that happened last year at the Aerospace and Cyber Conference that will stick with me for the rest of my life was she came up to me one day and she said, "Do you have lunch plans?" And I'm like, this is like the second in charge of the Space Force's wife
Right.
coming up to me, little old me, asking me if I have lunch plans today. And I didn't. And so I said as much. And she said, "Well, then you need to come with us." Kind of like that other story with like my friend saying, "I need to get you together with Leslie." And I'm like,
Right.
I don't know who Leslie is, but if Jessica says I should go, I'm going to go.
Right.
Same thing with Mary. I don't know who us is, but if Mary Thompson invites me to lunch, I'm going to go.
Right.
And so she invites me and she tells me, where they're going. And we walk as a group down to this restaurant. And I'm sitting, she's kind of at one end of this long table, and I'm kind of at the other end of the long
Hmm.
table. And I'm looking around, and some people I know, most I don't.
Hmm.
And so I'm trying to catch names. We do a quick round of introductions, and I'm like texting under the table asking Nick, who is a
Hmm.
senior enlisted spouse. Husband is pretty high up in the Space Force on the enlisted side. His last name starts with a B. She's at the table a few seats down from me.
Hmm.
And he's like, "Oh, that must be the Benavenias." And it turns out like he's now the chief in charge of the Space Force. He either is about to become or just has become. He was taking over from Chief Toberman,
Okay.
who was the senior most enlisted person
Mm-hmm.
in the Space Force. She was at the table. From Mary Thompson on down the row, it was almost like she had cultivated a trickle down from
Mm-hmm.
her down to like myself, another NCO guard spouse, a colonel spouse across the
Mm-hmm.
seat from me. Like it was almost like rank and file.
Right.
She had hand cultivated this group of people who happened to be at that event,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there weren't a ton of spouses there, but like the spouses that were there, she got us together and she brought us together for lunch because she was in a position to make it better for the next generations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she modeled it by saying, we're going to go to lunch together. And she didn't just say, the senior most spouses of the Space Force are going to go to lunch together.
Right.
It was all the way down to little old me,
Mm-hmm.
squadron commander's wife, right? And it was so intentionally like the way that the table, like the way we were seated,
Mm-hmm.
and who was there, it was such a clear and intentional effort to ensure that we walked away from that meal not only feeling included
Mm-hmm.
and like, wow, this is really cool that I got invited to come to lunch with this group,
Right.
but also I walked away with that feeling of I've just been charged to help carry on that legacy.
Right.
And just a couple weeks ago, another senior spouse and I were talking, and I said, one of the things that really stuck with me was that thing from that
Mm-hmm.
conference last year. And she said, oh my goodness, and Mary won't be there this year
Mm.
because he just retired and they're
Right.
going to be stepping back to make sure that the next family
Mm-hmm.
can really take, be that family. Let me reach out and talk to a few people and try to help make sure that lunch happens because that happens every year.
Right.
And we don't want to lose that now that Mary's leaving. She felt it too, and she's a general officer spouse. Like
Mm-hmm.
her husband is pretty high up in what he's doing, and she feels that too. She
Right.
felt that sense of, well, we can't let that torch go out now that
Mm-hmm.
Mary's husband is retired and they're moving on. We need to continue that legacy. We need to continue that tradition. So I see it in all these different people that I have seen making a real difference. I see that putting ego aside
Mm-hmm.
and instead focusing on what's best for the greater good or what's best for the people after. Because those same senior spouses could surely have said, well, we're going to have a general officer's wives lunch,
Right. It could have been
right?
very. It could have been very clicky, very fast. But
And
instead,
that's
it was just welcoming and inviting.
and intentional,
Yeah.
not accidental. It was so welcoming, so inclusive, and so intentional. That kind of thing is exactly what you're talking about when you say leaving it better than we found it. Right. And that's setting the expectation that when those other people who are sitting at that table, when their
Mm-hmm.
spouses are climbing up into the most senior roles,
Mm-hmm.
that they will not say, okay, Geo's wives, let's go to lunch.
Right.
That they will have in the back of their minds that the way we do this is
Mm-hmm.
we bring to get like, hey, you're just a colonel's wife, or you're just a lieutenant colonel's wife, or
Right.
hey, you're a chief's wife. Come with us. We want you to have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we make it better. So yeah, what you're talking about, I'm seeing like at every level of my involvement in the advocacy stuff that I've been able to be involved in. And I'm seeing it modeled by people who certainly don't have to.
Right.
They could choose to be more exclusive. They could choose just put their head down and
Mm-hmm.
focus on getting through those most senior command times. And
Mm-hmm.
instead they're making space, they're pulling up seats, they're creating a legacy, you know, and making it better for the next generation.
Right.
It's a pretty special community to be part of.
It really is. Like I've met. I kind of held off on being on like taking on any kind of spouse role, if you will, because like at our first duty station, I was working full time, but because that's the area I was basically from. I mean, Barksdale is an hour and a half away from Northwestern.
Yep.
So whenever she got orders to Barksdale, I was like, I don't even need a map. I know exactly how to get there. And it wasn't until, and then we went from there to Maryland, not even being attached. It wasn't until we got to Alaska that I was like, okay, I really, because that was the second place I'd been where it was incredibly remote, didn't really know anybody. Matter of fact, I did not know anybody.
Mhm.
But that was the first time I really started saying, okay, well, I need to be more involved. And okay, well, this is kind of weird. How can we fix this? This doesn't look right. How can we fix this? And trying, and that's really when I started actually actively trying to make it better.
Yeah.
But it wasn't because I felt like I needed to. Like, some spouses like, no, I have to do this to help my spouse. It was because we I saw an issue, saw something that could be
That's right.
fixed,
That's right.
and that's all I cared about.
That's exactly right. If we're doing it to help because we think it's gonna help our spouses
Hmm.
move forward, that's the wrong reason. Because
Yes.
that's not that if that's how it works, that's not how it should work.
Right.
Right? They should be moving forward in their careers by their
Hmm.
own merit, by the work they're doing, and
Hmm.
in competition with peers.
Right.
Right? That should be separate and distinct ethically from anything that we're doing.
Hmm.
um, so if we're doing it for that, it's for the wrong reasons. Legally speaking, they're not supposed to promote based on those things, right?
Right.
That's not supposed to be a factor. But when you walk into a space and you say this needs to be fixed, and I'm a person who can fix it, I
Hmm.
think that's when you know you're stepping into your purpose.
Right. Oh man, I I want to be very respectful of your time. I told you to. I told you like an hour and a half. We've gone like 2 hours.
Yeah,
I know
you
you've
asked
got
me for 10 minutes, Mike. What are we
one
talking
more
about?
thing. One more thing. But I know
Listen,
you've got a lot of other stuff because like you said, you've got to get ready to go to DC. Um, if people want to connect with
yeah,
Melissa, where can they connect with you at? I know you're
best place to
very
find
active on
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place because that's also Facebook's more like my personal friends, you
Right.
know. But yeah, LinkedIn. I think the best way to find me on there might be to look at your profile and look at your connections, right?
Yep. Yep.
Or to look. I'm actually Melissa Gilliam Shaw on
Mhm.
LinkedIn. I have my maiden name because I actually kept my maiden name as one of my middle names, so
Mhm.
it still is my name. It's not just
Right.
like Melissa Shaw, nee Gilliam. Like
Right.
they do in obituaries. Like it really is Melissa Gilliam Shaw,
Mhm.
and that's how I'm listed on LinkedIn. And that's even my like URL. So like the linkedin.com/in/
Mhm.
Melissa Gilliam Shaw. It's probably the best place.
That's
And
what
if they're not sure, they can reach out to you and you can figure out a way to connect us.
well, more people need to remember they can go in and change their URL for LinkedIn
Mhm.
because otherwise it's just that long weird thing of like numbers and letters and whatnot. You can change it.
I actually made a QR code for mine recently too. I just got new like cards made,
Yeah.
and on it, instead of being like all stodgy and stuff about it,
Mhm.
mine now say, I can't wait to connect with you. And it has my phone number and everything, but I have a QR code on there.
Oh, cool.
And the QR code goes to my LinkedIn.
Nice.
And so I've only had them for a couple of weeks, but I've
Mhm.
had a couple of events in that time. And when I've handed them out, people are like, yeah. And they immediately snap that QR
Yep.
code. So that's something to consider too. If you got any cards you're making, there's some way on LinkedIn that you can pull your QR code up. So if you're like at a networking event,
Mhm.
you can like pull your own code up and
Oh,
somebody else can scan your LinkedIn profile with their
that's cool.
phone.
Mhm.
But I always forget how to do it. Every time I figure it out, and then when I'm on the spot and actually talking to people, I like my brain misfires and I can never remember how to do it on the spot.
It's all of a sudden draws a blank. It's like I promise it's there.
Yeah, it
All
exists. I just can never find it when I need it.
right. Well, this has been an absolute riot. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. So like I said, I want to be respectful of your time. You've got a lot going on. So we will chat later offline and you have fun getting ready to go to your conference next week.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I hope that my rambling is helpful for some spouse somewhere. And then I need to talk to you because I need to help you utilize my Rolodex for some people that you could interview. Because I've got some really neat people in my network who would probably love the opportunity to talk to you.
I would love that.
Yeah,
So all
make
right.
some
Well,
connections.
you have a great day and we will talk soon.
It's always fun, Mike. Tell Kelly I said hi.
We'll do later.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Bye.